Hello, boring dreamers. Tonight we wander back into the foggy streets of Victorian London, where the men in stiff wool uniforms, those tireless postmen, set out before sunrise to deliver not just letters, but the very lifeblood of gossip. You hear the echo of your own boots against wet cobblestones as the gas lamps flicker, and you realize these men often walked 30 miles in a single day. That has more steps than your fitness tracker has ever dared to imagine, and without the luxury of cushioned sneakers. You probably wouldn't survive the week, but they did it daily, fueled by nothing more than weak tea and sheer stubbornness. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake with me right now, post your location and the time where you are. I love seeing how far our sleepy little community stretches across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in the half-darkness, breathing in the mixture of coal smoke, horse dung, and damp wool. The city hums before it properly wakes, and already dozens of postmen shuffle into line, adjusting their satchels. Their shoes are sturdy but already worn, soles thinning against the unrelenting stones. The first fact you learn: these men didn't simply stroll around with a few envelopes. The average Victorian postman walked the equivalent of a marathon every day. And unlike today's postal service, they didn't have vans to haul them around, just aching legs and determination. The second, quirkier detail is that some Londoners actually complained the postmen were too fast. Imagine that. You send a letter of outrage to your neighbor, and by the time you've put the kettle on, there's already a reply at your door. Historians still argue whether this near-instant cycle of correspondence actually fueled more quarrels than it solved. After all, when gossip moves at the speed of a man's stride, tempers can burn quicker too. You trudge along, shoulder to shoulder with them, and already you notice the rhythm. Satchel straps squeaking, leather soles striking cobbles, the occasional cough to clear out the morning chill. Someone jokes, half asleep, about how they should be paid extra for carrying letters of heartbreak, since they weigh heavier than the rest. You chuckle softly, though you know his boots will carry him for 30 long miles before he collapses at night. You pass storefronts where bakers shovel bread into ovens, and the sweet smell mingles with soot. Postmen glance longingly, but breakfast is still hours away. They've got rounds to begin, routes marked not by street signs, but by memory. Because here's another fact. Naps were considered almost an insult to a skilled postman. If you didn't know your territory by heart, you weren't worthy of the uniform. Imagine memorizing not just streets, but the quirks of every household. Who tips with pennies, who loads a knock at the wrong hour, and who tries to bribe you with fresh pie. As you march with them, one fellow mutters about the weather, as though complaining might keep the rain away. Another adjusts his cap, grumbling that his wife stitched it too tight. The city still dozes, but the postmen march, harbingers of chatter and scandal. Without them, no love affair could spark, no business could collapse, no politician could receive his daily flood of complaints. They are, in a sense, the nervous system of Victorian society, stretched on blistered feet. And so you carry on, deeper into the fog, with boots scraping, gossip fluttering in canvas bags, and a faint grin at the absurdity that so much history was carried on legs that never stopped moving. You feel the scratch of wool against your neck as you follow the postmen into the heart of their uniformed world. The coats are thick, heavy, and utterly unyielding, designed more to announce authority than to comfort the wearer. Brass buttons gleam faintly in the morning gloom, catching stray light like tiny lighthouses guiding you along the streets. You tug at the cuffs and imagine the pride stitched into every seam, a badge not just of employment, but of endurance. These men are more than messengers. They are tiny, walking pillars of Victorian civility, their presence both reassuring and slightly intimidating. The official look comes with practical perks too. A uniformed postman could pass through certain gates, command attention in households, and sometimes even receive small tokens of appreciation or bribes, depending on your moral compass. The quirky side, though, is that some postmen took great joy in embellishing their appearance. Extra shiny boots, slightly too large caps, polished satchels. They weren't doing it for vanity. They were marking themselves as masters of their streets. And in a city that measured status in subtle cues, it mattered. Historians still argue whether this obsessive attention to appearance actually improved efficiency or was simply a show for the neighbors. As you trudge along with them, you notice the weight of the uniform. Each brass button jingles like a tiny bell with every step. Wool bites at your wrists. Satchels sway, pulling at your shoulders. You catch yourself adjusting the straps, realizing that carrying letters isn't just a task, it's a full-body experience. Some postmen reported blisters forming within hours, yet they marched on, legs pumping, heads high. The minor injuries were badges of honor, reminders that you had walked the city in all its moods and miseries. The social function of the uniform is just as important. Residents recognize it instantly, and even the most cranky Londoner would offer a polite nod or a curt wave. There's power in recognition. The uniform says, "I know where you live, and I will reach you." This was vital in an era when communication was far slower, and timely delivery could make or break a business deal or a scandalous affair. And yes, some postmen even reported that letters stuffed with juicy gossip occasionally earned them knowing smiles or quick winks at the door. Imagine being a quiet observer of secrets, holding entire lives in canvas bags that smell faintly of ink and leather. You trudge past marketplaces now, the aroma of roasting chestnuts and coal fires blending into a haze that clings to your uniform. A brass button catches a shaft of sunlight, and for a moment, you feel almost heroic, as if the code itself whispers, you are indispensable. The mundane, exhausting, and oddly sacred act of wearing the uniform ties these men to the city's rhythm. Without it, their miles might feel pointless. With it, every step is a step into a living story. And so you walk, a living statue in red wool, adjusting your satchel, tightening your boots, and wondering how many miles this very uniform has witnessed over decades of drizzle, snow, and relentless sun. You enter the sorting halls just as the first pale sunlight trickles through tall, grimy windows. The air smells of ink, dust, and the faintly sour tongue of damp paper. Hundreds of letters lie in haphazard piles, and the noise is a low, constant murmur of shuffling envelopes, occasional coughs, and the clatter of wooden sorting racks. You realize immediately that this is the beating heart of the postal system, where chaos is given a fragile order, and where every postman begins his day with a delicate dance of organization. You run your fingers over the letters, feeling the embossed crests, the delicate handwriting, and the occasional blot of ink that refuse to dry. Some are business notices stamped with authority. Others are love letters, sealed with wax and scented with lavender or rosewater. One quirky detail you notice is that some postmen had a habit of keeping particularly elaborate letters as treasures, slipping them into their pockets just to admire the artistry of someone else's correspondence. Historians still argue whether these small acts were harmless fascination or early forms of minor theft, but in the soft lamplight of the sorting hall, it feels almost innocent. The methodical sorting process is hypnotic. You watch postmen quickly scan addresses, tossing each envelope into the proper pigeonhole or rack. They memorize streets and districts the way modern readers memorize entire books. There's an almost meditative quality in the repetition. Fold, glance, place, repeat. You find yourself following the rhythm, your own body swaying slightly as if counting time in heartbeats. Each envelope carries not just ink and paper, but expectation, rumor, and the invisible threads of human emotion. One mainstream historical fact is that sorting halls were often gender segregated, particularly in the earlier decades of the Victorian era. Men dominated the bulk of labor, while women, when they entered the system, were relegated to clerical roles, handling posts less physically demanding than tramping miles across London streets. Yet you notice some postwomen creeping in later, gaining confidence and challenging tradition, quietly reshaping the system. And then there's the oddities. Some postmen reportedly could recognize a sender just from the scent of paper or the curve of a handwriting flourish, an almost psychic familiarity that allowed them to prioritize certain letters. Imagine sniffing envelopes and knowing whose heart or plot lies inside. You probably wouldn't have this skill, but they did. The hall hums and the morning stretches on, the outside world waiting impatiently. You trudge from one rack to another, inhaling the mixture of dust and ink, feeling like a participant in a hidden theater of letters. Gas lamps sway slightly, shadows dancing on walls lined with racks, each slot containing tiny secrets of a sprawling, gossip-hungry city. And somewhere in that shuffle, you realize that the rhythm of sorting is almost a lullaby, a strange, meticulous hum that sets the tempo for the rest of the day's long, relentless walk. You lift your boots from the worn floorboards and step into the streets, feeling the soreness that already whispers from your arches and calves. The postman's shoes, thick and sturdy, are scuffed and soaked through in places, leather creaking with every step. It's astonishing how miles of cobblestones can shape a human body, flattening heels and toughening saws, until the boots themselves seem part of the man. Every footfall tells a story, not just of distance, but of endurance, a silent testament to countless letters delivered rain or shine. You notice immediately how intimately postmen knew the terrain. Each street corner, lamp post, and alleyway was etched into their memory. Cobblestones were counted subconsciously, street patterns memorized like verses of poetry. A quirkier fact is that some postmen would intentionally walk slightly different routes on their rounds to avoid the occasional puddle that seemed to harbor mysterious sticky substances. Historians still argue whether this was cautious practicality or early evidence of obsessive ritual among postal workers. Either way, the result is clear. Every mile walked mapped London not on paper, but on the very soles of their boots. Your attention shifts to the rhythm of walking. 30 miles a day isn't just a statistic, it's an experience. You trudge past market stalls, dodge carts drawn by impatient horses, and sidestep pedestrians who don't notice the fatigue in your step. Postmen developed an internal metronome, an unspoken cadence that allowed them to deliver letters efficiently while keeping energy in reserve. You might chuckle to yourself imagining these men practicing their steps, like a slow-motion ballet across a city that rarely pauses. You also realize the social power embedded in those shoes. Each knock at a door carried weight. A postman's presence signaled news, whether joyous, mundane, or scandalous. Some households even altered routines to ensure their postman's favor, offering small treats or polite greetings. And then there were the unlucky one's residents, who tried to evade mail, thinking no one would notice. The postman noticed everything. You probably wouldn't survive a week before the city itself corrected your laziness. As you trudge further, you start to appreciate the microcosm of London beneath your feet. Stones slick with rain, mud squeezing into boots, the occasional discarded newspaper. Each step is both punishment and privilege. You remember the stories of postmen who fell asleep standing, legs locked in place from years of repetition, dreaming of letters and gossip alike. And here you are, walking in the shadows of their lives, feeling the ache, the pride, and the strange intimacy of shoes worn to leather, carrying secrets mile by mile. You pause briefly at a street corner, noticing the faint clatter of hooves fading behind you. Horses used to dominate the delivery system, pulling carts laden with letters and parcels. But you quickly sense the shift. The streets now belong to walking men. The clop of horse hooves has given way to the steady thump of leather boots on cobblestones, a rhythm that pulses through the city like a quiet drumbeat. You realize that the transition from equine to pedestrian power wasn't just practical, it was revolutionary. Men's legs, hardened by relentless miles, became engines of communication, carrying gossip faster than any horse could navigate narrow alleyways. The mainstream historical fact is that by the mid-19th century, walking postmen had largely replaced horse-based routes in central London, primarily because foot delivery was faster for dense urban neighborhoods. Yet, the quirky detail is that some postmen still kept miniature pony routes for fun imaginary lines they would race against in their minds, pretending the slow horses couldn't catch them. Historians still argue whether this playful rivalry actually enhanced efficiency or was merely a way to combat monotony on endless rounds. Either way, it kept spirits alert in an otherwise grueling routine. You trudge along, feeling the pull of your satchel, the leather straps cutting gently into your shoulders. Each step is a negotiation with gravity and exhaustion. You dodge a cart, sidestep a puddle, and notice a small cluster of children peering out of a doorway, giggling as if they've discovered the postman's secret world. Some postmen indulged these little interactions, letting children peek into satchels or delivering a tiny greeting with a wink. In a way, these moments humanized the endless march, softening the harsh edges of 30 miles of daily labor. The gossip itself moves with the pace of your feet. A letter tucked in your bag might contain an announcement of a new job, a whispered affair, or a political scandal poised to ripple across the city. You feel the weight of it, not just in leather, ink, and paper, but as a tangible force that shapes daily life. Postmen were the carriers of both mundane facts and the juiciest tidbits, bridging households in ways modern emails can only mimic in speed, not intimacy. As you pass a familiar pub doorway, you glimpse the postman who delivered by horse yesterday, now retired or relegated to administrative duties, watching the walkers with faint envy. You imagine the pride swelling in a man's chest as he completes a route without aid, every mile conquered by sheer determination. You might even catch yourself thinking that there is a strange poetry in it. The legs that replace hooves, the man who becomes the horse, the city itself bending to the rhythm of human endurance. You pause under a low-hanging gas lamp, catching your breath and glancing at the small, perforated squares of colored paper clutched in your satchel. These tiny stamps, affordable and standardized, are a marvel of the modern age, the brainchild of Rowland Hill's famous penny post reform. You feel a quiet thrill at holding them, knowing that a single penny could send a letter across London or even to the far reaches of the British Isles. Penny post didn't just revolutionize communication, it democratized it, transforming gossip from a luxury for the elite into a daily habit for everyone. Without these stamps, postmen like the ones you walk beside would carry a fraction of what they do now, and the city itself would be quieter, less connected. You notice the absurdities, too. Some residents complained that stamps encouraged laziness. Why call in person when you could write a note and expect it to arrive tomorrow? Meanwhile, postmen reported getting caught in the middle of elaborate schemes, from neighbors writing overlong letters to ensure scandal lingered, to mischievous children gluing extra stamps onto envelopes for fun. Historians still argue whether the surge in written correspondence fueled more social cohesion or just intensified gossip-fueled anxiety. You can't help but imagine the postman shrugging, thinking, well, at least my legs get a workout. The tactile joy of handling stamps is oddly soothing as you march along. Each one represents a connection, a story waiting to unfold, and a chance to participate in the invisible threads that knit the city together. You see the variety red, blue, sometimes commemorative designs, and can almost feel the thrill a young clerk might have had when sorting new batches. These were more than paper. They were magic tickets to the city's bloodstream of communication. You tug your satchel higher on your shoulder as you pass an ornately carved doorway, imagining the letters tucked inside. Some are mundane reminders about rent or polite inquiries about business, but others hold far juicier content. Love letters, scandalous notes, and secret correspondences slide between the hands of postmen and into the eyes of households eager for news. You feel the weight of it not just physically, but morally. Every envelope carries stories, and every step you take brings you closer to revealing or concealing them. The quirky truth is that postmen occasionally became minor co-conspirators in romances. Some reported giving subtle hints or extra care to letters from young lovers, ensuring the inked secrets reached their destinations intact. A folded piece of scented paper might pass through 30 miles of bustling streets, jostled and soaked, yet delivered faithfully, sometimes with a wink or a knowing nod from the postman. Historians still argue whether this minor meddling skewed the social fabric of Victorian London or simply added charm to daily life. Either way, you realize that your walk is about more than movement. It's a bridge between hearts, minds, and whispers. You imagine tripping lightly along cobblestones as you balance an envelope pressed close to your chest, picturing its contents. Confessions of love, furtive apologies, or occasionally, blackmail. One postman in historical records was rumored to have memorized the handwriting of certain scandal-prone families, recognizing a letter before it reached the sorting rack. The thought makes you smile, though your own handwriting would never earn such attention. It's far too wobbly and impatient for anyone to decode without a magnifying glass. And then there is the social impact. Letters carrying personal secrets often traveled faster than word of mouth. A minor quarrel or whispered rumor could be formalized in ink and delivered before a neighbor even realized the event had occurred. Postmen, walking tirelessly, were the arteries through which London's emotions circulated. You feel the subtle tension of responsibility in your muscles. Drop a letter, and a heart might break. Misplace one, and a scandal could ignite. You probably wouldn't survive the pressure without becoming a nervous wreck. Yet these men thrived. As you continue, your senses absorb both the physical and the human landscape. The rhythmic scrape of boots, the scratch of wool against skin, the smell of ink and paper, all converge to form a symphony of Victorian communication. You sense the intimacy of the letters, the weight of the stories, and the way a single envelope can carry joy, grief, or chaos across miles of streets. Walking beside these postmen, you understand that they are not merely delivering messages. They are shepherding the pulse of the city, one secret at a time, 30 miles and counting. Rain pelts down in fine sheets as you pull your coat tighter, leather straps cutting across your shoulders. The streets glisten under the gaslight, cobblestones slick and treacherous, puddles reflecting distorted images of shop fronts and lamp posts. You trudge on, aware that Victorian postmen had no choice but to endure the elements, whether sleet, snow, or the occasional blinding sun that made wool unbearable. The weather is relentless, and yet it is a silent companion on every round, shaping not just the journey, but the very character of the men who walk these miles. A mainstream historical fact is that postal workers were expected to deliver letters regardless of conditions, and there are records of routes completed during blizzards and heavy downpours, often with the postman arriving soaked and exhausted. But here is the quirkier tidbit. Some postmen developed a peculiar superstition that stepping only on certain cobblestones could ward off particularly foul weather. You step carefully over the threshold of a townhouse, satchel bumping against your side, and immediately sense the secondary challenges of your route. Dogs, terriers, spaniels, and occasionally an irritable bulldog spring into your path with teeth bared, growls vibrating through your boots. Some postmen learn to carry small sticks or biscuits to distract particularly aggressive canines, while others simply ran faster, praying their sprint would outweigh the fury of a resident's pet. You dodge and weave, the city itself a gauntlet, every corner presenting a new surprise. The mainstream historical fact is that dogs were a notorious obstacle for Victorian postmen, so much so that official guidelines suggested strategies for avoiding bites. Yet here is the quirky element. Some postmen apparently trained themselves to whistle certain tunes that would calm dogs, or at least distract them long enough to slip past. Historians still argue whether these methods were effective or largely exaggerated in letters and memoirs. But imagining a postman serenading a growling terrier adds an oddly charming layer to the routine. Bribes, too, play a role in your walk. A coin slipped discreetly through a letterbox, a kind word for a gatekeeper, or even a small treat for a fussy child could make delivery smoother. You wonder whether such gestures were acts of cunning, social lubrication, or just polite survival tactics. Some households even relied on this little quid pro quo, subtly expecting it as part of the daily ritual. And you, walking in their worn shoes, feel how delicate the balance is. One misstep, and letters might be delayed, scolded, or worse, misplaced entirely. You duck under an awning to avoid a sudden downpour, feeling the rhythm of your breath sync with the slap of leather against cobblestones. Every step demands attention. A loose paving stone, a puddle, a dog, a suspicious neighbor peering from behind curtains. The city is alive with hazards, yet these men move as if the streets themselves are extensions of their bodies. You can almost sense their intimate knowledge of who bites, who bribes, and who simply yells. As you continue, tea breaks and tavern stops hover like distant oases in your mind. You can almost smell the smoky interiors, the thick aroma of boiled leaves, and the occasional waft of ale small comforts after hours of dodging dogs, dodging mud, and negotiating every obstacle the city hurls in your path. Every bribe, every sidestep, every whistled tune for a snarling terrier becomes part of a delicate choreography, a survival dance for men whose job was to deliver gossip, news, and secrets with precision and, when necessary, cunning flair. You finally duck into a narrow tavern tucked between brick buildings, the warm air hitting your damp coat and tired muscles like a balm. The smell of smoky ale, burnt wood, and overcooked meat wraps around you, and you slump into a wooden chair that creaks ominously under your weight. Here, postmen gather for brief reprieves, exchanging stories that are far more interesting than anything contained in their satchels. You listen as they recount absurd encounters, from letters delivered to the wrong scandalous address to children hiding notes inside apples. These tiny tailies are almost as vital as themselves. They read the human glue that binds exhaustion to endurance. The mainstream historical fact is that Victorian postmen often relied on these smoky taverns for warmth, sustenance, and socialization. These were more than pit stops. They were informal guild halls where news was shared, complaints aired, and strategies passed down for surviving the relentless rounds. The quirky detail is that some postmen maintained secret handshake rituals or code, phrases that allowed them to identify fellow couriers in crowded rooms, a vestige of camaraderie and subtle competition. Historians still argue whether these traditions genuinely improved morale or were just whimsical exercises in social bonding. But for you, seated among them, it feels like stepping into a brotherhood. You sip weak tea from a chipped mug, feeling its warmth seep into your chilled fingers, and watch as letters are whispered over the bar, glanced at, and then secreted back into satchels. Some are love letters, others political whisper. Night falls like a heavy curtain, and the streets transform. Gas lamps flicker, casting elongated shadows that twist over slick cobblestones. You hear the distant clip-clop of the occasional carriage, but mostly it is the soft, steady rhythm of boots on stone, the heartbeat of postmen continuing their rounds long after the city has drifted toward sleep. The chill is sharper now, seeping through woolen coats and leather gloves, and every breath hangs in the air as a visible puff. You trudge forward, aware that while most Londoners are tucked in, these men are still moving, delivering messages that might change lives before dawn. A mainstream historical fact is that night deliveries were common for urgent dispatches, particularly legal notices or government documents that demanded immediate attention. But here is the quirky reality. Some postmen reportedly carried small lanterns designed to cast minimal light so as not to wake residents prematurely, almost like ghostly shadows moving in the dark. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or merely the imaginative embellishment of later memoirs. But it adds a spectral quality to the night, as though the city itself is being quietly stitched together under dim illumination. The streets are quieter, but not silent. You pass doorways where muffled snoring leaks into the alleys, windows fogged from interior warmth, and sometimes the low howl of a dog that has spotted you from the shadows. Every turn carries the possibility of surprise, an unlocked gate, a neighbor up late, a letter that must be delivered precisely, regardless of the hour. The weight of the satchel seems heavier in the darkness, not just physically but morally, as if every envelope carries its secrets more profoundly under the cloak of night. You notice the strange intimacy of these hours. Without the daytime chaos of carts, markets, and children, the postman becomes a silent observer of lives paused, yet still humming faintly beneath closed doors. One letter might contain a scandal that will erupt at dawn, another a tender note that ensures a heart will beat a little faster. You feel the rhythm of the city slowed to a near whisper, punctuated by the scrape of leather on stone and the occasional distant bell marking the hour. And then there is the minor absurdity that makes you smile. Some postmen claim to memorize which houses had creaky doors or particularly tricky locks, timing their knocks to avoid unnecessary noise. You imagine them tiptoeing like performers in a silent ballet, their bodies perfectly attuned to the nuances of a city that sleeps uneasily, yet relies entirely on their tireless legs. The night is cold, long, and unrelenting, but it is also a world alive with secrets, gossip, and the quiet triumph of every mile conquered in service to a city that never fully rests. You trudge past the gas-lit docks, the scent of salt water and coal mingling with the familiar tang of ink and paper in your satchel. Letters from across the British Empire travel along these routes, dispatches from India, Africa, the Caribbean, and beyond each one, a thread connecting distant lands to the heart of London. You feel the enormity of it, that these small pieces of paper carry not just information, but the weight of commerce, colonial administration, and personal longing across oceans. Every step you take helps link families, businesses, and governments in ways that are invisible, yet vital. A mainstream historical fact, the Victorian postal system was instrumental in maintaining communication between Britain and its colonies. ensuring that officials, merchants, and families could correspond despite vast distances. But a quirky detail is that some letters contained tiny secret compartments, hidden messages, or even small trinkets, miniature souvenirs, or tokens of affection tucked between pages. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or mostly anecdotal, but the mere thought adds a layer of intrigue to each envelope you carry along the slick cobblestones. You imagine the postman carefully handling such letters, aware that their contents might affect a business transaction in Bombay or convey the hopes of a soldier's family in Calcutta. The stakes feel higher than delivering a simple rent notice or a neighborly complaint. You finally leave the alleys behind, stepping into a broader avenue where shopfronts glow warmly against the fog. The contrast between shadowed passageways and this faintly cheerful street is stark. You feel the relief in your muscles as the terrain smooths, but your satchel remains heavy, sagging with letters whose secrets and stories press against your chest. Even on easier ground, every step is deliberate. 30 miles is cumulative, and your legs hum with the memory of every cobblestone, puddle, and misstep from earlier in the day. A mainstream historical fact is that these main avenues were where postmen could make up time lost in alleys or tricky neighborhoods. Delivering to wealthier streets often meant careful negotiations with porters, doormen, or servants, all while keeping the pace necessary to finish routes before nightfall. But here is a quirky note. Some postmen admitted to humming tunes to themselves while walking these long stretches, partly to stay alert and partly to keep spirits high. Historians still argue whether this behavior was widespread or simply anecdotal, but it adds a touch of humanity to the relentless march. You notice the variety of households you pass, some grand, with gas lamps gleaming through curtained windows, others modest and cluttered, their chimneys puffing smoke into the fog. Letters may contain invoices for businesses, notices from distant relatives, or even polite notes demanding repayment of debts. You begin to understand the intimate knowledge postmen developed, who preferred their mail early in the day, who left windows slightly ajar, and whose gait creaked in a predictable rhythm. The rhythm of city life is subtly inscribed in every delivery. There's also the playful eccentricity of the postmen themselves. Some would intentionally fold letters in peculiar ways, almost like origami, so they could easily differentiate categories while marching. Others carried tiny notebooks, recording not just addresses, but observations about household habits, stray pets, or even patterns of gossip. You marvel at this combination of precision and personality, a functional system, yet distinctly human in its quirks. You trudge past an open bakery, inhaling the scent of fresh bread and pastries, a minor reward for trudging miles of city streets. The aroma momentarily distracts you, reminding you that the city is alive in more than just letters. It is smell, sound, texture, and occasional humor. And while your legs ache and your shoulders groan under the weight of correspondence, you feel a strange pride in imagining the network. You support the small yet vital role you play in a city that runs on ink leather and human endurance. Dusk deepens, and the city's ambient noise softens into a low hum, punctuated by distant bells and the occasional rattle of a cart. You glance at your watch, noting that the pace you've maintained over hours has been relentless, yet the miles ahead remain daunting. Each step is a negotiation of stamina, posture, and mental endurance. You feel the satchel tugging at your back, as if it contains not just letters, but the hopes, fears, and dramas of everyone in London. Carrying their stories is both an honor and a subtle torment, a reminder of the invisible burden you bear. A mainstream historical fact is that postmen often logged 30 to 35 miles per day, a feat requiring rigorous stamina and acute attention to detail. Quirkier, however, are anecdotes of postmen memorizing entire streets by scent, the subtle combination of smoke, damp brick, and cooking fires that uniquely identified a block or alley. Historians still argue whether these olfactory memories were widespread skill or simply Isolated claims of particularly observant men, but imagining someone navigating the city almost by smell adds a surreal dimension to the long march. You trudge past shuttered shops, noting the faint glimmer of gaslight reflecting off wet pavement. Occasionally, a late resident emerges to fetch a forgotten item, exchanging a polite greeting or offering a brief smile in acknowledgement of the tireless delivery man moving past. These small human interactions, fleeting as they are, punctuate the otherwise mechanical rhythm of walking and sorting, offering tiny moments of connection amidst the endless miles. Then there's the idiosyncrasy of postmen's timing. Some deliberately adjusted their pace to coincide with certain household routines, knowing when doors would be unlocked or when a friendly cat might nap in the sunspot of a doorway. You might smirk at the thought of men orchestrating their entire day around nap schedules of pets, but it's part of the subtle intelligence required to thrive on these exhaustive rounds. You catch a whiff of freshly baked bread wafting from a late-night bakery, imagining the postman who sometimes paused just for a few seconds to savor warmth and aroma. The streets, while empty of the majority, are alive with the whispers of letters yet delivered, the tension of missed envelopes, and the faint, comforting rhythm of boots on cobblestones. Each step is a meditation on endurance, patience, and the strange poetry of a job that exists at the intersection of fatigue, human curiosity, and the relentless pulse of urban life. You cross a narrow bridge spanning a sluggish, blackened canal, the water reflecting fractured gaslight like jagged shards of gold. The night air carries a faint tongue of brine and coal smoke, mixing with the familiar scent of ink and paper pressed against your chest. As you walk, the bridge seems almost symbolic a threshold between the more bustling parts of the city and the quieter, labyrinthine neighborhoods that demand intense focus and memorization. Each footstep echoes, a solitary percussion accompanying the march of letters, secrets, and gossip. A mainstream historical fact, bridges and canals were often tricky points for postmen, requiring careful navigation and heightened attention to avoid accidents or slipping into the water. A quirkier anecdote is that some postmen reported using bridges as landmarks for storytelling, noting which ones were haunted by persistent pigeons or curious rats that seemed to time their scavenging to coincide with mail delivery. Historians still argue whether these observations were practical or largely embellishment, but imagining a postman sidestepping rodents mid-delivery adds humor and vividness to the relentless journey. You trudge along, the leather of your boots squeaking faintly on wet stone, the satchel pressing more insistently against your back. There is an almost meditative cadence in this repetitive motion. Left foot, right foot, adjust satchel, glance at letters, avoid puddles. Your muscles ache, yet the rhythm is hypnotic. You imagine postmen forming mental maps of the city through repetitive contact with streets, buildings, and landmarks, a living cartography encoded in memory, guiding them past hazards without conscious thought. The social implications of your deliveries hover in the air like the fog. Every letter carried has potential impact. An urgent notice might alter a household's morning plans. A scandalous revelation could ripple through a neighborhood before dawn. Postmen unwittingly wielded influence, their movements silently shaping events. Some letters even required negotiation, an authoritative knock, a polite explanation, or a small indulgence to coax reluctant recipients. You imagine their tact, patience, and occasional wry amusement, necessary for survival in both social and physical realms. And then there rests the minor absurdity that warms your imagination. Some postmen claim to communicate with each other across bridges using subtle whistles or taps, like a private language understood only by those who had walked these paths countless times. You picture the faint echoes bouncing across water, a hidden network of knowledge and camaraderie in a city that seems vast, indifferent, and daunting. You trudge onward, absorbing every sound, shadow, and sensation, each step a testament to endurance, intuition, and the quiet artistry of delivering letters through a city that never truly sleeps. You move into a quieter district now, where lampposts are spaced farther apart, casting long, lonely shadows over the slick pavement. The streets feel almost deserted, though occasional windows reveal muted glows of candlelight or a sliver of a figure pacing. Here, the challenge shifts from dodging carts and dogs to navigating long stretches of monotony, where fatigue begins to seep into your bones, and the satchel feels as if it weighs twice its actual load. Every step becomes a test of focus, memory, and sheer willpower. A mainstream historical fact is that postmen often struggled most in these quieter areas, where long, uninterrupted stretches could sap attention and rhythm. But here's a quirky element. Some men carried small, self-devised charms or trinkets for luck on these monotonous stretches, a tiny coin, a smooth pebble, or even a scrap of ribbon from a previous delivery. Historians still argue whether these habits were widespread superstition or mostly isolated eccentricities, but they add a human touch to what might otherwise seem purely mechanical. The physicality of walking 30 miles becomes almost hypnotic. You notice the slight throb in your calves, the gentle ache behind your knees, and the way your shoulders adjust to the satchel's persistent pressure. Each cobblestone seems to push back just enough to remind you of the effort required. And yet, the rhythm of motion provides an unexpected solace. The repetitive sound of leather on stone becomes a grounding beat, a personal metronome guiding you through the night. You pass a series of modest row houses, imagining the letters inside, a note announcing a new job, a bill for overdue rent, or perhaps a secret rendezvous arranged in ink and folded carefully. Postmen carried these stories with silent diligence, rarely privy to their outcomes, but acutely aware of their responsibility. You realize that their endurance isn't just physical, it's also moral and social, a subtle, invisible labor shaping daily life. Then there is the minor absurdity that makes you smile despite exhaustion. Some postmen claim to converse quietly with street cats on these lonely stretches, a sort of mutual acknowledgement of shared nocturnal vigilance. You picture them pausing mid-step, nodding to a feline observer as if to say, "We're both on duty, friend." These small rituals, whistles, charms, or feline greetings offer glimpses of humor and humanity amid miles of relentless, solitary walking. You continue, each step carrying the weight of letters, secrets, and quiet endurance, through streets that are at once beautiful, empty, and demanding in their isolation. The fog thickens now, curling around your legs and obscuring familiar landmarks. Street lamps are dim halos in the mist, flickering occasionally as if winking at you, and you have to concentrate harder to distinguish puddles from shadows. Every step is deliberate. A misjudged stride could send you splashing into a puddle or jostling your precious letters. You realize the city, in its nocturnal attire, has transformed into a landscape both eerie and mesmerizing, where even the most mundane delivery feels like an expedition into the unknown. A mainstream historical fact is that Victorian postmen frequently encountered fog, especially in London's industrial districts, which was often thick with coal smoke. Visibility could be so low that letters were sometimes temporarily left in secure locations to prevent misdelivery. Yet there is a quirky historical detail. Some postmen supposedly used the fog as cover to play minor pranks on fellow couriers, tapping them on the shoulder or rearranging letters for harmless confusion. Historians still argue whether these anecdotes were true or embellishments in memoirs, but imagining a stealthy game amid fog adds a layer of human whimsy to otherwise grueling routines. You trudge forward, the chill settling into your bones, each breath fogging the air in front of your face. The satchel digs deeper into your shoulder, and you find yourself counting steps, focusing on the rhythm to ward off fatigue. In these silent, fog-bound streets, every small sound is amplified. The shuffle of boots, the distant barking of a dog, or the occasional creak of a gate swinging open. You feel as though you are moving through a world both intimate and vast, a city made simultaneously of stone, fog, and human expectation. The letters themselves seem heavier at night. A forgotten love note, a business demand, or a political whisper carries extra weight when delivered under the cover of darkness. Postmen unwittingly become custodians, not only of messages, but of suspense, anticipation, and even anxiety. You imagine recipients sleeping uneasily, unaware of your footsteps approaching with news that could shift their morning or life entirely. And there is the small absurdity that keeps you half amused, despite fatigue. Some postmen claimed that the fog carried whispers of letters, as if the mist itself was gossiping. You smile at the thought, adjusting your satchel and pressing on. Every step, every breath, every careful negotiation with shadows and wet cobbles reinforces the strange poetry of this work walking 30 miles to carry the pulse of the city, all while the fog swirls and the night listens quietly. You descend a gentle slope leading toward a quieter residential quarter, the fog thinning just enough to reveal shuttered windows and silent doors. The air smells faintly of damp brick and burning coal from distant chimneys, a comforting, familiar aroma that reminds you that the city, though asleep, is never truly still. Your legs ache, your shoulders protest under the satchel, and yet there is a quiet satisfaction in maintaining rhythm. Each step an assertion of endurance and purpose. You are aware, perhaps for the first time in hours, of the subtle intimacy you share with every house you pass. Each envelope a story entrusted to your care. A mainstream historical fact is that postal routes were designed to maximize efficiency, often winding through both bustling avenues and sleepy residential lanes to balance workload and timing. But a quirky tidbit is that some postmen carried tiny notebooks where they jotted informal observations about households, pets, or even local rumors, forming a private ledger of the city's life. Historians still argue whether this practice influenced broader social understanding or was simply a coping mechanism to make long walks more interesting. You pass a faintly lit window and imagine a resident peeking out, perhaps aware of the postman's approach, or perhaps unaware of the stories nestled in their letterbox. Letters contain everything from mundane bills to secret love notes, minor scandals to urgent government communications. You feel the weight of responsibility again. Misplaced or delayed correspondence could ripple outward, creating misunderstandings, missed opportunities, or unintended drama. The role is both mechanical and human, a delicate balance between precision and empathy. Then there's the humor in the daily grind. Some postmen developed personal rituals to survive long stretches, like counting their steps to a particular landmark, humming favorite tunes, or imagining witty commentary on the letters they carried. You smile, recognizing these small mental games as essential for maintaining morale during relentless walking, rain or shine, day after day. Finally, you consider the broader cultural impact. These men were the conduits of information, gossip, and connection. Every neighborhood they traversed, every doorstep they approached, and every letter they delivered stitched together the city's social fabric. You step over a puddle, adjust the satchel, and press on, fully aware that your journey like this carries far more than paper. It carries the heartbeat of Victorian London, threaded through every mile, every whispered secret, and every careful delivery that shaped daily life with quiet, persistent diligence. The final stretch unfolds before you, a mix of familiar streets and minor, twisting lanes that demand careful attention, even after hours of walking. Fatigue hums in every muscle, a dull ache in your calves and shoulders that insists on being noticed. You adjust the satchel one last time, feeling the weight of letters pressing against your chest like tiny bundles of private dramas. The city is quiet now, almost reverent, as if it knows the end of your long march is near. Each step resonates with a strange mix of relief, accomplishment, and the lingering burden of responsibility. A mainstream historical fact. Many postmen concluded their rounds late at night, often returning home exhausted, their bodies and minds taxed by 30 miles of walking. But here's a quirky touch. Some kept tiny talismans in their pocket coins, ribbons or charms to mark the completion of each route, small celebrations of endurance and precision. Historians still argue whether these were widespread habits or anecdotes from particularly colorful individuals, but they offer a glimpse into the subtle rituals that helped men cope with relentless labor. As you move, you pass shuttered shops, faint glows in upper windows, and the occasional whisper of someone awake, perhaps preparing for the next day. Letters clutched in your satchel might announce births, deaths, scandal, or secret affection, tiny threads that shape lives in ways invisible to anyone but the carrier. You imagine the quiet triumphs, the small acts of heroism, delivering a critical notice on time, ensuring a love letter reaches its intended, or simply walking without faltering in the cold drizzle of night. The absurdities of the day, the whistled tunes for dogs, the foggy bridges, the imaginary dialogues with cats, and the minor competitions in taverns linger in your mind as you trudge the final miles. You smile at the memory of these small, human touches that make endurance bearable, even charming, in a job otherwise defined by repetition and physical strain. The rhythm of boots on cobblestones, the press of leather against shoulder, the faint scent of ink and paper all become a lullaby, a testament to persistence, subtle humor, and the enduring artistry of a seemingly mundane profession. Finally, the familiar silhouette of home appears, doors closed against the night, windows dark. The last letters are sorted, satchel emptied, and you pause to savor a deep, satisfying breath. The journey ends, yet the stories you carried continue, threading through London's quiet streets, waiting to unfold in the hands of their recipients. 30 miles completed, secrets delivered, lives touched. You sink onto a chair, weary yet fulfilled, the city settling around you in a hush of fog, lamplight, and distant bells. Now the pace slows, and you allow your mind to drift, leaving behind the press of satchels, the jostle of streets, and the faint tongue of coal smoke and damp paper. Imagine the city stretching in quiet repose, the gas lamps dimmed to a soft glow, the distant bells marking time in gentle intervals. Your legs, once tense with the rhythm of 30 miles, begin to relax, each ache melting into a calm awareness of endurance completed. You breathe slowly, inhaling the faint scents of homewood smoke, baked bread, warm wax, and exhale the lingering tension of night's labor. Think back to the letters, the whispered secrets, the minor dramas threaded through every doorstep you passed. These letters, now safely delivered, carry their stories quietly into the lives of others, leaving you free to simply observe the city in its nocturnal tranquility. You feel a sense of completion, the invisible work of connection and communication settling into a gentle echo. Each mile walked, every puddle avoided, each careful step over slick cobbles now forms part of a tapestry woven through the night, subtle and enduring. Let your thoughts linger on small, comforting details. The occasional cat who acknowledged your passage, the soft murmur of a tavern long closed, the playful whistling or mental games that sustained worn legs and weary minds. These human touches, seemingly insignificant, are what carried men through the long hours of relentless walking, and they now carry you into this soft pause. The city, the night, and the rhythm of boots on stone all fade gently, leaving a residual sense of connection, humor, and quiet accomplishment. Allow the imagination to drift further, the fog lifting from canals, the early glow of dawn poised to touch rooftops, the calm streets awaiting the next day's energy and gossip. You feel the continuity of life in a city that never fully sleeps, the pulse of human stories and endurance, stretching from one home to another, 1 mile to the next. Your mind softens, letting the weight of the day dissolve into a soothing rhythm, the kind that eases you closer to dream, closer to rest. Now, as your eyelids grow heavier and the gentle hum of imagination quiets your senses, feel the calm wash over you. The night is complete, the letters delivered, the city still, and you, safely tucked within the comfort of reflection. carry only the lingering warmth of accomplishment, the faint smile of remembered absurdities, and the steady beat of endurance fulfilled.